So I want you to stop and think. Think about that day that your husband proposed to you. What was it like? Were you excited when you told everyone? Did they all go around saying, "Hey, what's the date? Have you set your date?" It's the most exciting time ever. And then all the preparations for that wedding. But what happens after you get married? Sometimes we think that marriage is a destination. And once we got there, we got the engagement, we got the wedding done, we got the honeymoon, and it's a destination. Now we're there. Now what do we do? Well, sometimes everything goes right, but most of the time there's a little challenge here and there. But today, Mandy Daniel is going to share with us some true ups and downs that she's had in her marriage, and it's not always been easy. But guess what? There's always hope when you stick in there and you find that help that you need. Welcome, Mandy.
Thank you.
Well, so let's see, where would we start with that introduction? I would say, how did you and your spouse meet?
We are the quintessential high school sweethearts. We went to a small private Christian school together almost all of our lives, actually. We didn't know about each other till about middle school. So we met then, and basically he played basketball and I was a cheerleader. So we were in school all day together, and then we were at sports practices and games all afternoon and evening together. And so our life was just together. So now we were a lot of on again, off again, but that's how we met and began.
So, you guys knew each other as kids and you spent lots and lots of time together and probably with each other's families too, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, so you said, and we were on again, off again. So, what kind of made that happen?
Well, I have a theory, and sometimes I tell my children, when you start dating, you get to a point in a relationship that you either get married or you break up. It's kind of like you get to a certain point and you make it permanent and you keep going forward, or it's frustrating and it's not working and you break up. And we had lots of cycles throughout school just because we were young and not doing things really well, but probably normally. And it was a small school, so we just kept cycling back around to each other, basically.
Well, I find that often the more things that you have in common that you do together really keep you kind of connected. What kind of things did y'all have in common?
Well, like I said just before, our whole life was in common. We really are very different personality wise, and which is I think is common, and very different interest wise. He is a sports guy, and while I played volleyball and I was a cheerleader, I was somewhat athletic, but just not in the whole realm that he was in. So, we did the normal teenage things together. We'd go to movies and go to dinner and things like that. And even now, those are the things we like to do together. We just got to visit the Masters for a golf tournament, so we still do some sports stuff together. We like baseball fields and golf courses. I guess we have that in common. So, but we are very different.
And really, the more things that you do together, that really does help. Now, sometimes our differences, because I teach on the personality styles, behavior styles, and sometimes our personality styles, not meaning to, not on purpose, will rub each other wrong. And often that is trouble if you don't realize, like if somebody's really straightforward and they tell
Mhm.
and the other person is not, uh, they take it wrong, it hurts their feelings, or if one person won't open up and talk to the other and tell them
Right,
what they really need and what they really think, then that person you can't know if they don't tell you, right?
right, right.
Just sometimes those things are challenging. So fast forward, how many years did you guys date?
We dated on and on off from the time I think I don't know if it was 14 or 15. We got married when I was 19 and he was 20. So you know, probably in the grand scheme of things, we didn't date very long, but it was most of our lives.
Most of your teens, especially because those kind of go by. And hey, everybody wants to find that special somebody while in their, they're in high school and spend all that time together, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You have the
it's a sweet
proms
thing.
together and
Yeah.
and all that kind of thing. Okay, so once you were married, how did it go? Was it pretty smooth sailing? Because I know you had trouble later, but was it
Yes.
smooth sailing?
Well, due to those personality differences, he is the quiet one, hence why I'm sitting here. And then he does not do conflict, does not like doing conflict. I actually do not either. So we don't argue, we don't fight a lot. So things are quiet and peaceful, but sometimes too quiet. So he doesn't voice his opinion too readily, and I tend to tell you everything I think. So that little combo probably set us up for some unhealthy habits for the future. But we had our first baby 2 years after we were married. So we started having children really young also because we were so young when we got married. That timeline meant that we were young with babies and they came fast and furious. So we had our first four, I think it was in 6 years, and life was crazy busy. So there wasn't a lot of getting down to the nitty gritty and fixing things, that little problems or anything like that. So he was working hard, and I was busy at home, and so it was just real easy to do life side by side, and it be peaceful, to be honest.
Okay, so those early days with the kids, you guys were just uh figuring
Surviving.
it out. And I always like to say, we're all practicing, and Mother's Day is upon us pretty quickly here. And I always say, um, as moms, we're practicing.
Right,
Even doctors are practicing,
right,
and when we get married, we're practicing. We sure don't think of it like that, but we're actually practicing because we're just emulating whatever our parents did.
right,
That's all we know, isn't it?
right, right.
Yeah. So, all right. So and also I will say we've had a family living with us while their house is being repaired and they have small kids. And it reminds me, because I'm an empty nester, it
Hmm.
reminds me what it's like and how you don't have that much time for each other whenever, you're taking care of kids, especially small children, because you got to watch them all the time.
Right. And I think the mental load too, like you're always thinking of something else, tomorrow or an appointment or, supper or, whatever. So your mind is very distracted, even if your time is not that distracted, but your time is too. So yeah, I think that's a big thing.
I think also whenever our children are small, I mean, we hugged and kissed on our spouse and loved on them and sat close at the movies or watching TV, holding hands, going to the ball field, whatever is going on like that. But when those little ones come along, suddenly, you're having to take your hands off your spouse and
Everybody's,
hold those little hands or hold one in your
yeah,
arm or sometimes both.
yeah,
And, it becomes a very busy time. And a lot of our love is given to those babies.
yeah,
We
yeah.
love to smoodle on them and kiss them and hold them, and that makes me think. I have a free gift that people can get. It's called The Chemistry of Lasting Love,
Hmm.
and you may have tapped into that. The Chemistry of Lasting Love, and it actually talks about that each of us as adults have five top needs. And for men, it's usually a certain five, and women a certain five, but that's never for sure because we're actually, like you said, personalities. We're all different.
Hmm.
And when those needs get filled, it's like when you take the little assessment on that and you figure out what your husband's top needs are and what your top needs are, it helps you then focus on just two or three, right? What do they
Hmm.
need most from me? And probably a lot of times when kids come along, those needs get pushed to the side and it's okay for a while, but not okay forever, right?
Right. Well, kids' needs are very loud,
Oh, yeah.
so they always get priority when they're in that stage.
That's exactly right. So I would say probably, of course we love our kids. And
Mhm.
what would life be without our kids? And I have
Right.
grandkids now. So, but it does make a hard stop on romantic love with your spouse because suddenly there's no time and a lot of your attentions are given elsewhere.
Mhm.
So, when did you start to realize that there were some actual challenges?
Um, we were probably about 12 years into our marriage, and there was just a distance. We we do some things well habitually, and but it's not enough. You know what I mean? Because it's not the full emotional connection that really holds a relationship together. So about 12 years into our marriage, yeah, it was just weird and distant. And I was on the phone with my mom one night, and I and he wasn't home yet, and it was just getting later. And he's a UPS driver, and he's worked multiple jobs at some points when he was part time and things like that. So, but because we had gone through cycles before as teenagers, my mom just kind of said, Jason not home yet, that kind of thing, and I said no. And I don't know why I told her because I don't usually say too much, but I said, I feel like he's about to break up with me. And it was
Oh,
just that feeling that I had kind of been trained for a little bit just in our really young years. But it was the feeling that I could tell he had pulled away. And and throughout the course of the next week or so, I just found out that there were multiple affairs going on. And and that began just a season of just, I mean, we were the fairy tale poster children in some ways, just met in high school and didn't really date. We dated other people when we were off again, but not too, everybody knew that we were serious, And so
and you're probably a
um
cute couple.
well, of course.
Of course.
But but we just it was just the way it was. And so and Jason's also very steady. He's very loyal.
Hmm.
I mean, he's been with UPS for almost 30 years now. And so he's methodical, and that is one of his strengths. You can depend on him and things like that. So so it was really odd for him to be not dependable in some way.
So, Mandy, I'm kind of hearing that he was probably a great dad. Like you said, he's dependable and a good husband. What I usually find with that type of personality style is they're usually good listeners. Was he usually a good listener?
He is very observant in a lot of ways. And yeah, because he's not the talker, he ends up being the listener a lot.
Mhm.
So, and he would prefer not to be the talker a lot of times. He doesn't mind answering questions and, going to dinner and things like that, but it's just not his mode of operation. Yeah.
So, did you find that during that time, as you found out more on that the emotional disconnect was the fact that he was not sharing maybe what he really needed or that whatever it was, you think that's what made y'all grow apart?
Absolutely. We have been through some counseling in this part of the season that I'm talking about that address needs like that also. And he he didn't put out an opinion readily, but I also didn't give a lot of room for it. And so in that dichotomy, it was just that I by default made decisions without his opinion, and
Because you thought it was okay,
I thought
probably.
it was okay. Nobody told me
Mhm.
otherwise. He didn't tell me otherwise. And so while we both recognize our responsibilities of just seeing each other better, me seeing him and giving him space to give me feedback, and then him, being responsible that he didn't offer. any input. It created that distance. And then when you have kids, you're making a lot of decisions for your family, for the way you do things. And so there was a lot of that too. And I don't think in the long run, he was not very upset about the decisions that were made. In the initial explosion, I guess, of everything, he said he was. But as we've talked through it later, the way we did things in our family was not the part that bothered him. He just felt left out. He just
Mm,
didn't
mhm.
get his say, but you got to say for somebody to hear it too. So we definitely see, both sides of that coin.
So how did you react whenever you found this out? You were saying that you were talking to your mom. Maybe she said something that made you think, or you were already kind of thinking there might be a problem.
No, I would have never dreamed, I don't think. I had a friend that had been through some experience and I was asking her some questions, and she encouraged me to dig a little bit to see if I could find anything. And I did. And that that reaction it was ugly. It was not pretty. My world crumbled because this is what I'd always wanted. I'd always wanted to have four children and stay at home with them and things like that. So I didn't know I was a stay-at-home mom. I didn't have a career that I could fall back on. There were a lot of unknowns. I didn't know, how things were going to end. I didn't know really what to do. We come from Christian backgrounds. We were proclaiming Christians at the time. And so, you start dealing with what you do believe about divorce and where you want to land in that. And of course, infidelity is usually a pass. That's usually like, okay, you got it, girl. You can take care of this. But you still have a choice. You still have a choice. And so that it caused me to really have to deal with what I understood my faith to be. So that was a huge part of that lesson for me and walking it out for me.
Do you think it was less personally about you? Because we always take it personal, like it's me. What did I do? What did I not do? But more than often, it's the other person, and I don't know, whenever you go through the different needs that people have, some people have that need for adventure and doing things together and
Mhm.
something new. Some people have that need of spending a lot of time together. And it's there again, usually there's 10 needs. Literally, there's
Mhm.
something missing out of there whenever somebody starts to stray, or if
Mhm.
they had a parent that also strayed out of their marriage, they had that example, of that. Um, I don't know, but it's keeping that connection.
Yeah, I think we had a ton of factors going on. I think that is a typical season. From what I've found, we've been married 20, going on 28 years now. And so there are certain sticky points, and it's not certain years, I don't believe. I think it has a lot to do with your season of life and where your children are and what you're doing in your life and where your career is and all those kind of things. Sometimes it has to do with decades and how we transition during those times. I know we were very deficient in needs, both of us. So that is probably a given. One thing that is very important to me when I get to talk to other women that are going through this is that we do not we do not cause other people to sin. We sin with our own on our own behalf,
We make our own
and so
choices.
it is important to know. I mean, I did not cause this. I know
Mhm.
that I did not cause this. Did I have some responsibilities for the breakdown in the relationship? Yes, I absolutely did. But that does not mean I deserve, to the
Mm-mm.
betrayal that there was. And I even from well-intentioned people around me, they would ask me questions that would say, "Well, do you do this? or
Oh,
have you done this? And it has nothing to do with any of that. It we actually had a decent intimate life during the time. It wasn't that. It wasn't. I don't think I was a cruel person. I think he had to make me a cruel person in his mind to give himself permission, because I think we do that. We justify our sin, or we justify something we know we shouldn't be doing. We figure out a way to make it okay.
throw
So
blame on the other person,
right,
typically.
right, right.
Yeah.
So I think, there was that going on too. And honestly, he did have a huge life upheaval in that his parents had just gone through a divorce after 32 years or so. I don't remember the exact number, but that was very difficult because I was angry. I was angry that we were having to go through it, at this time, and I was angry at them not doing the thing, like, you're supposed to be our examples.
Mm,
You are supposed to be, steady, and you're supposed to be past this junk, And
yeah.
so I know my anger put pressure on him. Even though I wasn't angry at him, he felt that, and there's tension and things like that. So I mean, it's always a perfect storm, right? It's never one thing, I don't think, unless
Right.
it's just one
Many.
crazy big thing. But in our life, definitely, it wasn't just one thing.
Well, as you found out about all this, it is our responsibility, like you said, it is our responsibility how we act, what we do.
Mhm,
But typically, just like I said, marriage is a destination. I can think of
mhm,
other things that I've done that I worked really hard to get there, and then I got there and it was a destination, but
mhm,
not really, because there was a lot more. Just like when those kids started coming,
mhm,
you jump into place to take care of kids and help them, as they say these days, be good human beings, right?
mhm, mhm,
And we get so wound up in that. And I do find it interesting that it was 12 years.
mhm,
And so probably the kids were starting to get, where they could do a little on their own.
mhm,
And I know as an empty nester, suddenly it's like the things that you were doing, you don't have those anymore,
mhm,
and we start to move away from one another because I've been married over 40 years.
mhm,
You start to move away from each other a little bit, really not realizing it because you're not there again, filling whatever those top needs are of that person. And you don't even realize it until you're empty. And the people who don't talk that much and don't share,
mhm,
I don't want to say it's their fault, but I've even said to my husband, because everything's always perfect and fine for him, like, not me. I always have an opinion. But,
mhm,
everything's always good for him. I'm like, now someday, before I even started studying all the stuff I do now, I said, now one day, if you suddenly go, this has just been driving me crazy and I'm so done with it, I'm like, that will not be fair. And I will be so mad,
right,
if you do that to
right.
me. Because, you know, a lot of times we say one thing, but there's actually another thing kind of really bothering us.
Sure. Yeah.
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 So, what did you guys do? How did you find your way back out of this? Because it's such a gigantic thing in a marriage that
Mhm,
most people or many people don't make it past because both parties have to be willing to open up and to listen to one another.
mhm.
And how did y'all get past it?
Um, we may not have enough time. Um, so he left the home for a little while, um, and wasn't sure if he wanted to be there. Um, I quickly, honestly, I am probably in the personality pool where I like to solve problems.
Me too.
I go in to solve the problem. So I automatically start playing chess is the way I really describe it. And everything I did, the conversations I had with him, the way I responded to him was very, very intentional. And I wasn't being inauthentic. I was just being very intentional. So that was part of my walk and story. And he bounced back and forth. We actually went off. That was in October. Um, we went off on a trip that was pre-planned in November. We actually went.
Mm,
I was seeing my pastor, um, maybe weekly. I mean, pretty often. He had been in a couple times. So we were just spinning. I mean, it felt like we were just spinning, but we were just
Hmm.
trying to figure it out, you know. So he actually came home right after Christmas. And then in April, I found out that conversations were still going on.
Mm.
And so he left again in April, and it kind of got really messy then because there's a certain process you go through, you know, and I started that process. Not everybody does, and right, wrong, or indifferent. I started that process trying to hang on and
Mm.
just like nothing is worth this. Like I didn't want my family torn apart. Like that's just really what I could see. Um, there were lots of things behind that. I knew I had like even a um, religious or faith-based right to divorce, but that was balanced in my mind with Malachi too, that says that God hates divorce and he hates it for us. I mean, he hates it
Yeah.
because it's not the picture he intended marriage to be. So I don't want to say that and people hear he hates the people who divorce because that's not at all. It's not at all what I'm saying. I just didn't want to participate in something that he hated. So I was standing on that. I had made vows to God. So Jason may be messing him up, you know, or he may not be doing his part, but I made those vows to God. So, at that time, I had not been released from them. But in April, I was starting to feel some release because it was getting ugly. We were arguing in public. It
Trust
was
issues, I would imagine.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Mm.
And then also, you know, the longer he was gone, the more resentful he was going to be of what he provided for our home because he wasn't here. So then the financial stuff starts getting ugly and the you can pay for this and if you want this, you can do this kind of those tensions and arguments started happening and it got so heated that sometimes it wasn't behind closed doors. And so we had a community of friends that just were amazing and would were kind of taking care of us the best they could because there's you know people have to do this for themselves. So but anyway, they were loving us and putting up with us. And
But
so
you know what? I have to say some love and some prayer from your friends.
oh yeah, we
Yeah.
had that's part of the story that's not practical on this end, but we had whole churches having prayer meetings for us, and that kind of outpouring of support and love from my perspective was so humbling and
So
so
touching.
encouraging, you know, at the same time. So I had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful support system. I really did. Even my parents were just like, we're going to support you. We support you with whatever you decide. And my dad was like, when you're ready, let me know. I can help you, you know, with the legalities and that kind of thing. But they weren't encouraging it either. So it was very, I got to do what I needed to do. And I did have to pull back from a lot of things to like figure out what I needed to do. You know, what was the Holy Spirit telling me? So,
Nothing else really mattered at that point.
right,
Think of all the things
right.
we're involved in.
But we
Suddenly, if,
will,
yeah.
yeah, we will let people be the Holy Spirit if we're too, if we're not willing to be quiet and listen.
Hmm.
And people will step in and do that for you unintentionally in good for good reason, you know, with a good heart. So, but anyway, we continued to go back and forth and things like that. And I think that he had bounced around in different places to live and stay. And, you know, I think a lot of times people that are willing to get into a relationship that is not their marriage and that is somebody else's marriage, um, those those relationships are usually pretty volatile.
They don't last. Mm-mm.
So he was not having fun with the other relationships, which was to my favor. And but I was also getting to the point. Our pastor told him at one point, he said, when a woman's switch goes off, it goes off. Like when
Mm-mm.
she's done, she'll be done.
Mm-mm.
And there's some truth to that. I don't think anything's past repair, but there is some truth to that emotionally. And I was starting to feel that. I was starting to feel that. And honestly, I was praying, Lord, like I don't care anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You do whatever you have to do to save his soul because
Mm-hmm.
my marriage is not worth his soul. And whatever he thinks he's looking for is not worth my marriage. So I'm going to fight him for my marriage and then also, be willing to release my marriage for his benefit so that I and I couldn't be responsible for him, like it wasn't my job to be responsible for him. So you do have to sometimes let go of that responsibility and just I don't want to get in the way of God. I don't
Let
want to.
go and let God.
Yeah, yeah. So we
And
stand in his
undoing all
way.
that's an inside out kind of thing. Like he had to change on the inside
Hmm.
so that he could then change on the outside because it don't go outside in.
Absolutely. So I think we get in God's way a lot with our children
Hmm.
and our spouses and the people we love the most. We will stand in defense, against the Lord sometimes when we don't realize it.
So, Mandy, what are a few things that helped you get back on track? Can you remember?
Yeah, I there were certain things that, and I really hate calling them mantras, but there were certain things that I had to know I believed to to survive, to yeah,
Well, when I think about a mantra, I think about honestly, because we're Christian and mantras are kind of hooked to other things, but
right,
they're a buzzword these days, right? But mantras really are putting that right thing in your mind, that correct thing, what you want to believe in your mind instead of in a situation whenever there's betrayal like that. I think the devil really has a hold and he puts all that other stuff in our head. That stuff
right.
that drives us crazy. So I would say mantras are reversing and making no room for what the devil wants to put in your head.
Right. Well, I've mentioned a couple things. I wanted to remember that my vow was to God. I also kept in mind God hates divorce, but he will not hate me for it if this because I can't do all of that by myself.
Live like that.
Um, I also, early in the game, I took on the role that um, I really truly believe that there was a reason that he did not understand love, that Jason did not understand love. And because I identified as a Christian and because I was his wife by law, it was going to be my job to personify it the best of my ability. So um, God had given this man to me as a husband, and you know there's purpose in situations. I have a role in this situation, and I didn't believe he knew the Lord in a way that he could understand how to love me well because he didn't understand the love of God. He had been taught it, he had been raised in it, but he didn't know it personally. So I really had to understand and believe and flesh out, did I believe that the Holy Spirit was living and active? Because if I did, I didn't have to be responsible for him. That was who was responsible for him, and that's who would call him, and that's who would convict him, and that was not my job. And that released me from a lot of tension and some anger, and then also a lot of just the responsibility of having to tell him what I thought about things because it didn't matter what I thought. Um, I did not wanted to become who he thought I was because he had to make up this person in his mind that I was, and I did not want to become that person because we can do that. We can do those self-fulfilling prophecies by acting like what people are saying about us,
And
right? Even
bitterness is a poison.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I wanted to prove him wrong. I wanted him to look and go, what am I thinking? And so I at any chance that I got would be willing to talk about things and do my best to keep my voice even and just things that would not not play into this role that he had put me in.
What I hear
So,
is you stopped reacting.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know that I was, but whatever I had given him to work with had turned me into this person that he could not be with, and I didn't want to prove him right. I just really wanted to prove him wrong. So I knew that I could not take an action just to get a result. I had to take actions that I had a calling on my life to do, whether or not it got the result I wanted. So I can't do A to get B. I can't demand that of the Lord. I can't say, well, if I do this, then he should do this, or you should do this,
Because
or
then
this.
we're deciding instead of letting God decide, we're
Right.
deciding what, yeah.
And honestly, then my motive would have been wrong. I was just
Hmm.
doing something to get something else. And really, I wanted my heart motive to be the character of the person God called me to be. So that was really a lot of that, that I just had to do the right thing no matter what the result was. Right.
Well, and how about as y'all started to talk about it,
Mhm.
I'm guessing, did you learn to talk less and listen more?
Yes, I also have to learn how to encourage him to tell me. And I have not mastered that. But leaving space for it, but also being able to draw it out some, just because he's not comfortable with always. And sometimes it's things he doesn't think about. And I'm thinking about it, thinking about it, thinking about it. And I can say, what do you think? Well, he hasn't thought, so he needs some time to think about it. And then also, I might need to revisit it and very gently, because I'm just kind of let's dive in. I need to be a lot more gentle in making that space, saying, well, how does that work? Or what do you think about that? Or, we might have to do several walks around it before we get to the point.
Encouraging
So,
more conversation instead of
yeah,
saying so much about what you think yourself, which
right.
is what I think me and you might be a little like where we tend to, oh yeah, we think a lot, we think fast, and we think deep and wide.
Yeah, yeah. I know that I talked to a lot of people. It's funny when you go through something like this, people come out of the woodwork. I had family members say, well, nobody knows, but we've been through this. And honestly, I was not in the place to hear it because it just made me want to be mad at them too. But people will tell you things when you are going through things. And so also people that had been through it were very willing to talk about it. And I talked with this precious older lady that had just stuck by her husband, and it was interesting when when I talked with her, I said, well, he's home right now, and whatever, things are calm or whatever. And she said, well, honey, it's probably not over. And I hope it works well for you. And I thought, well, that wasn't encouraging at all. But later, I really saw the wisdom, in her just giving me that little prompting because things didn't catch me by surprise. So he came home in July, and we went to a marriage intensive at Windshape I believe it was in August. Friends from church supported us in that financially and keeping our four youngins and, in all the ways that we needed it. And we got some tools there to hold things together. We went and said, we're hitting the reset button. We're kind of okay. It was all done. It's done now. Now what? And so we did 4 days of intense counseling there, actually, probably five or six, and went through programs and trainings and things like that to just get the tools. I'm so sorry. Um, and then we came home and life rocked on. and babies kept growing. And we started discussing having another baby.
So, Mandy,
And
I want to take you back to wind shape. So, you
yeah,
found that you got the tools you needed and the time you needed together, a week,
yes,
right, by
yeah,
yourselves. And so you took that time together, and then I have to say you probably practiced what you learned and continued using what they told you during that time because that's a total focus because most of the time in life we're trying to do two or three things at once, right? And you got that time to totally focus on one another, find out your challenges, get the tools that you needed to help you. And do you mind sharing a couple of the tools that were really helpful?
yeah. So you just have little aha moments
Hmm.
and things that will smack you and go, oh, I've got to change the way I think in that department. And some of them were really simple things. For me, um, I was raised by a mom who didn't get married until she was 28 and was on her own. And she was very independent. She didn't know if she wanted to get married. I mean, it was just very much, it just happened, like the right guy came along. And she was never like pining for that. And my dad's an only child. So I come from a home of lots of independence. Just, I mean, they have a beautiful relationship, but very independent, both of them. And so I was naturally pretty independent, and and this happening made me want to rise up and not need him.
Hmm.
And so one of the things that really knocked me between the eyes was that God said it is not good for man to be alone. And, I've heard that all my life. I know that scripture, but for me to hear it in my heart, the way it was meant that we do need each other in life, we need each other in community. Humans need humans, and God made it that way. And He made it that way so He can show Himself, in our lives. Um, but that was huge. It caused me to not want to be so independent of Him.
And let me ask then also with his personality style, because when you tell me a few things on his style, then I can kind of put two and two together with the other things that I know. So, did he need you to need him?
I don't know. He does appreciate it. He does appreciate it to some degree. He probably wishes I didn't need him so much now.
Uh-oh. My husband likes for me to need him, like don't get too independent,
I've,
right?
I've let go of a
Oh,
lot of control of things in the lately, but
well,
um,
and so
but
what's something else you found that
yeah,
also
yeah.
helped?
So that was a big thing. We also talked a lot about how our heart acts like an emotional cup. And that cup, if it's not drained properly, will fill up with all the emotions and spew out. And when it
Mm,
does spew out, it spews out in gambling and alcoholism and drug addiction and affairs and anger,
pornography.
violent anger. Yeah, all
Yeah.
those bad things that we
Yeah.
know it's from an overflow of emotion that's not being dealt with. And so
Mm.
that was really good for us to hear. And they talked that at the bottom of all the cups is fear. And so if the fear is clogging up the cup, then nothing else is draining out. And the only antidote that scripture gives us for fear is perfect love cast out all fear.
Mm.
And so we have to know the love of Christ, and we have to be trying to work in the love of Christ, for because if someone's loving you well in Christ, all that comfort and stability and trust and those kind of things don't rear their ugly head unless there's a fear in a different area of your life. But when it came to us, it was really focused in on our marriage. And yeah, so I mean that was a big understanding for me.
So let's take a second and let's talk about between me and you, what do we think perfect love is? Not just thinking about God's love, because that is perfect love, but humanly for a couple, what is perfect love? How would we
Yeah, well,
describe that?
that being our model, I mean, if we're using God's love as our model, um, I would say number one, it's sacrificial and
Yeah.
it differs, right? So, I mean, I'm not a proponent. I hope you can tell, just by a little time that you can tell, I'm not a proponent of a doormat or, just being a yes man or anything like that. However, I think deferring to one another is going to create a comfort and a trust in one another that shows appreciation for one another, right? And it shows approval for one another and how you're relating together. And then sacrificial is just, I'm willing to put aside all my wants to work together on our wants. I don't think it's mine and yours all the time so much, but just what's for us and not just for me, you know. So those are the first two things that come to mind.
I also think about showing appreciation for one another because
Hmm.
sometimes we start to take each other for granted.
Hmm.
And, think about how it feels whenever, your spouse, male or female, that your spouse says, Gosh, I really appreciate that. Or, man, this dinner's great. Or, wow, honey, the yard looks great. Appreciation, affirming each other. And we
Hmm.
forget to do that. And, Mandy, I think sometimes that affairs begin very innocently in the way of, we're needy or we're tired, we've had no time with our spouse or our family, and um, somebody pays us attention. That attention, like when you're dating and you're like, oh, he's cute or she's cute, right? And that attention making on over them just a little bit. I mean, we're just all
Yeah.
human, right?
Yeah, that's really hard when kids are small. Like
I know
I
it because
mean,
you're just tired.
yeah, yeah, and you get into survival mode for sure. So, I mean, I don't think that nobody's getting attention. It's getting the attention that you need. It's getting a certain type of attention because we spoke every day and we saw each other every day and
Hey,
we
honey, what time you coming home? That's
yeah,
usually
yeah,
what
yeah.
time's
I'm
dinner?
I'm cooking for you every day. You're getting all my attention. But
Right.
it's not the same. And there's a nuance there that sometimes you have to just grow up a little bit to understand. And we got married so young that we just brought high school relationship into our adulthood.
Well, there's a book, it's called His Needs and Her Needs.
Mhm.
Somebody else, a friend of mine in Minnesota was telling me about it, and I finally had gotten it and read it, and that's where I got the chemistry of lasting love from. And when I think about challenges in marriage, number one, what I have found is background, how we're raised, how two parents intermingle and take different responsibilities. Maybe mom does it all and dad goes to work, or both people work, or I don't, however people intermingle as a couple, what all went on, if there was no discipline, if there was too much discipline. And then the next area past how we're raised is our personality styles and
Mhm.
whether we rub each other wrong or we do well together. Because sometimes I have a thing it's called the love bank. And
Mhm.
sometimes we drain our spouse's love bank without even realizing it, since we're talking about love. And important things in love is being appreciated, acknowledged, that you're doing a good job. Um, Suddenly I won't be able to think all the things, but everything that you do that deposits some love energy into that cup. But on the other hand, it's kind of like that scenario that you learned at WindShape, but it's a different one. So I loved hearing that from you. But the other way is like demeaning each other, talking down to each other, complaining, correcting each other, yelling at each other, all those things take out of that love bank. They withdraw. So it's just like a bank where you're depositing your money. You put in your paycheck, you got lots of money. Now you've got plenty of room to spend. But once that money's gone, there's no room to spend. So when that love bank gets empty, there's no patience with each other. You're shorter with each other. Maybe don't even like to be around each other. And people do have top emotions, and top emotions rule according to your personality, and that's how you react first when you're tired or frustrated or that kind of thing. And we're really not aware of them,
Mhm.
unless we do look at them and study them. So really, basically, background, how we're raised, what was acceptable, what our parents did. We bring that forward. And then if we've had other baggage, like, messed up relationships or a divorce before, that brings in even more baggage. And then those personalities and figuring it out. But simply understanding each other's needs, and I'm sure that as y'all went through this, you found a lot in that. It's understanding each other's needs and what you need most from each other.
I think
But a
the
lot of times
balance.
we're not aware until there's a big speed bump.
Right. I think the balance of that is I feel like as we've gone through different seasons, your top three needs aren't going to be always your top three needs. I think our needs come from where we're a little deficient in a lot of ways. I mean, our personality plays into that, our expectations play into that, but
Oh, yeah.
also just like if it's been a long time since I've had an girl, I'm going to have a need for approval,
Right.
or acknowledgement, or whichever one, fits into those. I don't know if you use the same. We went through a lot of those at WinShape, and I know there's five that start with an A, and then there's five more that that are different letters, and I can't ever remember all of the A's for sure. But whatever your because we're whole people, we're whole beings, it's kind of like wherever you're missing is the one that jumps to the front. So I think we have to keep reevaluating that and being aware of kind of doing all things well, to the best of our abilities.
Well,
Um,
and we all have different talents and learning
mhm,
to lean, I think, in on each other. So, boy, we've been talking for a little bit now. It goes by fast, doesn't it?
mhm,
And so, you got to a place where you did become kind of one as a couple again and enjoy each other's company and continue moving forward. And that's what I want people to know, that there's hope.
mhm.
Sometimes you have to have patience.
Yeah, I will say we had to go through another round of kind of crisis and things like that. It was later, 4 or 5 years later. I always say that WinShape gave us the tools to hold it together to get through the
Hmm.
second round, and so in that second round, I we had just had another baby.
Oh.
And so I had a 3 week old and found conversations again, just a little nudge from the Holy Spirit. I mean, I honestly feel like you just get a gut feeling and you start to recognize it really well when you've been through it. And so I just looked at him and said, "You don't know the Jesus I know, because you can't do this if you know him. You can't do this." And so we started another season, strangely again in October, and we had a older married couple that said, "Hey, we'll walk with you through this," and we would go to their house every Sunday evening, and they would pray over us, and they would just let us really tell our story and just speak truth and that kind of thing. I mean, it was very casual. It was very laid back. They were just being our friends, but they would pray with us and things like that. And there was a moment where Jason said, "I know." Well, when the gentleman asked him, tell me about your personal relationship with the Lord, and Jason said, "Well, I would tell you that I was a Christian, but I don't know him like you do, and my wife does." So he started recognizing that there was something off, something he didn't realize there maybe. And honestly, so about a month or 6 weeks in, he was just like, I can't do this. Like, I can't be this person that I'm supposed to be. Like, I don't have it in me. I cannot do it. And he actually prayed that night. He didn't pray very often out loud, and which was fine. It wasn't a big deal. He's quiet, so there was no pressure, or anything like that. But he did that night, and he just said, "If Lord, if you want me to be this kind of person, if this is true and you want me to be this kind of person, like I can't do it, you're going to have to do it." And that was kind of all that was said. And we rocked through the holidays, and we had a lot of attention from this couple, and um that was good. It was just comforting. And so we were doing pretty well. I mean, we were reading things together and realizing that he didn't want to leave. He didn't want to go through it all again, and he didn't want to lose his family. So he went all in on this round of whatever I've got to do. And my pastor was even advising. He was like, "Now's the time. Now's the time you make ultimatums. Now's the time you make things the way they need to be, or he can leave." And because this is enough. Enough is enough. And so he was wonderful in just being frank and kind of being on my side, but being a great compass at the same time, or help
Mm,
in that way. And so about February, I got a call. He was on the way home from work, and he had started devouring sermons and just whatever he could get his
mm.
hand on. And he said, "I think I got saved in November." And I said, "Well, me too, but it was for you to figure out," because there was definitely a difference in his life. And when you talk about healing, and I don't know how you do it in a different story, like when there's not this repentance, when it's hard to pinpoint the repentance and you don't see the repentance, I can see where trust would be an issue for a very long time. And I
Mhm.
still have my days. I mean, it's hard. It's hard for your body and your brain and your heart, your breath to forget.
That's right.
And so it just kind of tapers off as you go. And you can, I mean, it does heal, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of understanding. And now it was his turn to be understanding and patient, because I had crazy moments, and I mean, years later, I'd be like, "What's going on?" Because there's just a trigger, right? So,
Absolutely.
so there's all that stuff still happening in I mean, like, it's just life is messy. So I want to encourage people that yes, there is hope. And I stood on the verse in Psalms that said, "I would have despaired unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." Wait. Wait on the Lord. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. Wait on the Lord. And so I stood on that. Just he was going to show me his goodness in the land of the living. I didn't know what it was going to look like. It couldn't be my idea. It couldn't be what I scripted, but he was going to show me his goodness one way or another. And I could just trust him with that. And I just want people to know that you can trust his goodness and be obedient even if you don't get the result you think you should get.
He'll
Because
carry
I
you
have this
through.
little story that can be tied up with a bow that, "Oh, and we got back together. We had another baby and we got back together and we're all okay now." But life is still life and it's still hard. So, it's kind of like you want to lose a bunch of weight, lose a bunch of weight, lose a bunch of weight. And then when you lose all the weight, you realize all the wrinkles are there.
Oh
you know,
no.
it's that thing where, yeah, you think the grass is greener if it happens one way or another, but there's still going to be life in the middle of it. And so I just encourage people that it's it's doable. Everybody has to be surrendered and submitted and willing. Um, And we love walking with couples through that in the messy. We love giving what has been given to us. And, but it's just about growing individually as much as a marriage restoration.
And sometimes we have to give it up and give it to God because we've been figuring out everything for him and how this can happen and how he needs
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
And when we give it up and give it to God, he carries it on through. And we all want things quickly and instantly, and it's just not always instant. So, thank you, Mandy, for sharing your heart today. And
Thank
I know there's
you.
somebody else that's heard this that, it gives you hope, or it is important to, look for those ways to meet in the middle and and talk to one another. So look outside for help
Hmm.
because sometimes it's not really something. I mean, if there's a problem, it's hard to overcome that problem just together sometimes because there's something that you don't know or not recognizing,
Right.
in that. So,
I think
well,
one of the
thank you so
best,
much for sharing today. And you know
yeah,
what? When we're open, we help somebody else.
exactly.
And we think when we look at social media and everything else that it's all perfect, and everybody's not got perfect families. There's challenges in this or in that, and our challenges in life are just different, whether it's, an affair or uh children having, challenges and troubles or sickness or, whatever else. There's financial. So, anyway, and I think an important thing is to, pray for our friends, pray for our family, and know that other people are praying for us. It always
Mhm.
helps whenever you're uh, in a hard time. So, thank you again. All right.
Thank you.